All right, good. Definitely afternoon. In a short while, we will be joined by Luke Irving, who's the chief of the Mine Action Service in the occupied Palestinian territory. He will brief you from Gaza on the situation there, having to do with demining and unexploded ordnances. Just for the record, you saw that yesterday. We announced that the Secretary General had appointed Lieutenant General Ulisses de Mesquita Gomes of Brazil as the new force commander for the UN peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Speaking of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that the situation in Goma remains tense today, but it is also calmer. But there is, however, continued sporadic shooting and an overall reduction in exchanges of fire within the city. Continued clashes have been reported in surrounding areas, including in Sake, northwest of Goma. The mission's priority right now remains the protection of its personnel, its assets, and the many civilians sheltering within UN premises. Our peacekeepers are also planning on sending out patrols today in Goma to assess the situation, to conduct resupplies, and assess routes. In the capital, Kinshasa, the situation is also calm today, despite the calls for protests that we have seen. The main roads are reported to be empty and supermarkets are closed due to the high risk of looting. That's what our colleague in the peacekeeping mission are reporting. You will also remember that a few days ago we paid tribute to 3 UN peacekeepers who were killed in the last few days. We're now able to share their names with you. They were Private Rodolfo Cipriano Alvarez Suarez from Uruguay, who was 39, Private Mokote Joseph Mobe, age 33, and Private Andres Tshishido Mabele from age 30. The latter two were from South Africa. We send our deepest condolences to their families, their friends, governments, and to all members of the peacekeeping mission. The total number of UN peacekeepers injured since the most recent assault by the M23 now stands at 22, and I take this opportunity to reiterate that attacks against UN peacekeepers are not only unacceptable, but they also may constitute a war crime. Yesterday afternoon, our Deputy Special Representative for the peacekeeping mission in Goma, Viviane van der Peer, briefed council members. She reiterated that the violence in the eastern part of the country has resulted in massive displacement, worsened an already dire humanitarian protection situation. The degree of suffering that the population in Goma and neighboring areas is enduring is truly unimaginable, she said. In the past few days, Ms. van der Peer told council members that the peacekeeping mission had received a large number of people seeking refuge. She called on all parties to prioritize the protection of civilians, open humanitarian corridors, and work towards a sustainable and peaceful resolution to this conflict. Resuming the Luanda process is one of the utmost urgencies to ensure a path towards de-escalation and to avert the looming threat of a third Congo war, she added. Military action cannot resolve this conflict, she told council members. And just a bit more on the dire humanitarian situation Viviane was talking about. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the violence and looting of humanitarian warehouses has continued today in Goma, impacting both the ability of aid workers to respond as well as obviously putting them at risk. Since the escalation of fighting, our humanitarian partners have recorded more than 2,000 injuries caused by weapons and explosive shrapnel. Humanitarian workers are treating injuries where possible. Several bodies of people killed remains in the streets, while water and electricity supplies remains cut off since the 26th of January. We call for the swift resumption of these services, as well as for the protection of humanitarian warehouses and the facilitation of medical evacuation for people who've been injured. The airport in Goma, unfortunately, remains closed, which means that the flow of humanitarian cargo and rotation of humanitarian personnel have been suspended. Most of the roads that connect Goma to the rest of the country are also closed. However, the border with Rwanda is open, and additional humanitarian teams were able to enter today. We once again call on all parties to respect international humanitarian law and to end the violence targeting the civilians that we've seen. Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that UN agencies today brought 6 fuel tankers into northern Gaza to support bakeries as well as water, sanitation, and hygiene services and other essential activities. OCHA says the displaced families continue to return to their homes in areas in northern Gaza. As of earlier today, our partners estimate that more than 423,000 people have crossed south into north since the opening of the Salah ad-Din and the al-Rashid roads on Monday. Aid workers stationed along those roads continue to provide support to those on the move. That includes food, water, hygiene kits. UNICEF is distributing identification bracelets for children to help families stay safe and connected along the way. Those on the move also include unaccompanied children, pregnant women, older people, chronically ill, and people with disabilities, and those in need of continuous medical care. The World Health Organization says it supplied fuel, tents, and equipment, enabling the Palestinian Red Crescent Society to establish 2 trauma stabilization points at Al-Rashid Road. Our nutrition partners report that high-energy biscuits were distributed to 19,000 men, women, and children south of Wadi Gaza and to 10,000 people on the northern side. Our partners working in shelters are providing tarpaulin and sheets to displaced people in the north and east of Gaza City. They're also expected to distribute tents to families returning to their destroyed homes in both southern and northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Also, our partners who are working to support water, sanitation, and hygiene services are continuing to scale up water trucking in the governorates of Rafah, North Gaza, and Gaza itself. In Rafah, 300 cubic meters of potable water is being distributed each day. That's about enough for 50,000 people. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, OCHA also reports a drastic deterioration in the humanitarian and protection situation. Israeli forces continue their operations in the Jenin and Tulkarem governorates in northern West Bank. We've repeatedly expressed our concern over the use of lethal warlike tactics in these law enforcement operations. As these operations continue, OCHA is also receiving reports of civilian infrastructure being destroyed and essential services being disrupted. In Tulkarem, access to water and electricity has been disrupted. Initial estimates suggest that nearly 1,000 people have been displaced. Turning north to Syria, Geir Pedersen remains in Syria, where he's continuing his engagement with the caretaker authorities, including meeting earlier this week with the foreign minister, Assad al-Shaibani. He appreciated the in-depth discussions on the transition from the caretaker phase to a Syrian-led political process that is inclusive, credible, and recognized by both the Syrian people and the international community. Over the past week, Mr. Pedersen has been meeting extensively with a broad spectrum of Syrians, including groups such as the Syrian National Council, civil society representatives and Syrian experts, and individuals from all regions and communities. In parallel, the envoy remains actively engaged with high-level officials from the region and key international stakeholders. He continues to hear from Syrians across all backgrounds who share a common desire for a new and successful Syria and welcomes their strong interest in working with the UN to shape the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process. Mr. Pedersen is expected to brief the Security Council from Damascus tomorrow in a meeting in close consultations meeting. On the humanitarian front, our OCHA colleagues tell us that they completed yesterday an assessment mission to 2 communities in northern rural Hama, which is in the center of Syria, as you well know. This is the first in a series of weekly assessment missions planned to evaluate the humanitarian situation in communities impacted by recent hostilities in the governorates of Home and Hama. We also continue to conduct regular cross-border missions from Turkey. And on Monday, OCHA tells us they completed missions to Jandaris in northern Aleppo to monitor projects funded by the Syria Cross-Border Humanitarian Fund that support camps with fire safety systems. Meanwhile, OCHA is telling us that ongoing hostilities and violence continue to impact civilians across the country, particularly in the northeast, as you will have seen. Yesterday, according to our partners, shelling and other incidents affected the Al-Hasake, Ar-Raqqa, and eastern Aleppo governorates, including yet again areas near the Tishreen Dam, which, as you know, we've been desperate to try to repair. Meanwhile, staying in the region, our colleague Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, wrapped up his visit to two peacekeeping missions in the Middle East, the UN Disengagement Observer Force, UNDOF, and the UN Truth Supervision Organization, UNTSO. He ended his mission in Jerusalem, where today he met with UNTSO personnel and thanked them for their service for peace. While there, he also discussed with Israeli government and military officials the work of the peacekeeping missions in the region. In addition to UNDOF and UNTSO, they also obviously discussed the situation in Lebanon with UNIFIL. In his various engagements, he stressed the importance of the parties to ensure the safety and security of peacekeepers. Prior to that, Mr. Lacroix was in Syria, where yesterday he met with the Syrian caretaker authorities to discuss the mandate and implementation and challenges for both UNDOF and UNTSO. And on Monday, he visited UNDOF mission and expressed his support to those serving in both in UNDOF and to military observers from UNTSO, serving in what we call the observer group Golan during this challenging and volatile context, to say the least. He's on his way back to New York. We will have him live and in person on Friday here to speak to not only about his trip to the region, but obviously other peacekeeping developments that you know well of. Turning to Ukraine, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that attacks between the 24th of January and today have resulted in civilian casualties, with more than 100 homes, as well as a school, gas pipeline, and a port facility damaged. That's what local authorities are telling us. Our humanitarian colleagues also note that in many frontline communities, access to power, heating, water has been severely curtailed due to attacks on energy infrastructure. People have been without basic services for months while facing winter conditions. Humanitarian organizations continue to provide support as security permits, including construction material for repairs, for food, cash, and psychosocial support. Our humanitarian colleagues also note that aid workers continue to work in what are clearly very risky environments. OCHA tells us that in 2024, 53 humanitarian workers were killed or injured, which is slightly up from 50 in 2023. And our colleagues from the UN Development Program today released a report highlighting the severe challenges that are dramatically reshaping Myanmar. These challenges, which have occurred over the past 4 years, include political instability, entrenched conflict, economic disruption, human rights violations, environmental degradation, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Some alarming numbers for you: nearly 50% of the population in Myanmar lives below the poverty line. Less than 48% of the population had access to electricity last year. That's the lowest access rate in all of Asia. And 16% of rice-growing areas have been lost since 2021, which obviously has a negative impact on food insecurity. The report highlights the need for active international engagement and negotiations with all parties involved to help Myanmar navigate through its current challenges. The report is available on the interweb. And today is Lunar New Year. Very good, Margaret Bashir. And we send our warmest wishes to everyone celebrating, and this is the year of the snake. Exactly. What? The wood snake. In his message, the Secretary General says the snake symbolizes wisdom, resilience, and renewal. In these trying times, he added, let us be guided by these qualities to renew our commitment for peace, equality, and justice. Margaret, you won today. If you have a... All right, then you yield to Edie, and then Madame Amélie.
Thank you, Steph. You said at the beginning that the situation in Goma is tense but calmer. Does the M23 now control Goma? What is the UN assessment?
I mean, the assessment is that there is that there is an overall large presence of the M23 in Goma. Depends what you mean by the word control. Obviously, the fact that there's still gunfire, that there's still violence, means that we're in a very volatile situation. With, I think, good description would be with the M23 clearly having the upper hand.
And there have been reports that the M23 is moving further south toward Bukavu. Can MONUSCO confirm that?
Yes, I mean, we've seen these reports, which are obviously concerning. We're also taking measures in order to increase protection of civilians and protect our own personnel.
You want me to keep on a completely different
Let's
subject?
take an ED pause and let's go to Amélie.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Steph. About UNRWA,
Yeah.
tomorrow is the deadline that Israel gave UNRWA to vacate all these premises in East Jerusalem. The Secretary General in his letter to Israel said that, requested for this order to be retracted and that it's impossible. So what will happen tomorrow? Will UNRWA be able to or be willing to evacuate all its premises in East Jerusalem?
Listen, let's see what happens tomorrow, right? We have taken some measures, but I think as Philippe was clearly said yesterday, UNRWA will continue to deliver on its mandate until it physically cannot. Madame, and then...
Thank you, Steph. Do you have any comment about regarding the statement from the Israeli defense minister yesterday? And when he visited, he said that the Israelis are going to keep a presence in Mount Hermon in Syria.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the 1974 disengagement agreement remains in force. Obviously, we condemn any and all actions that would be inconsistent with that agreement, and we call on the parties to the agreement to uphold their obligations by ending all unauthorized presence in the area of separation. We're continuing to engage with the parties on their obligations. As you saw, Mr. Lacroix was there. What is clear is that there should be no military forces other than UNDOF forces in the area of separation.
And one more, he also today said that in Jenin, after the military operation there, that the Israeli army will stay in the Jenin refugee camp. I don't know if you have commented on that.
I haven't seen that, but I can tell you that we're obviously, as we've been talking about the situation in Jenin and Tulkarm, we're very concerned about the violence that we've seen, the disruption to civilian lives, and what we feel is a use of force in law enforcement operations that is disproportionate. Benny.
Thank you. Just a follow-up to Amélie. When you say you've taken measures concerning UNRWA, can you...
I mean, listen, I'm not going to go into great detail, but obviously we've taken measures to ensure that our staff is safe and that premises and records are also safe.
So you don't consider your staff in East Jerusalem as potentially threatened by law enforcement measures or so?
I can tell you that the staff, both national and international, will need to be protected according to international law, and according to Israel's obligations under international law. I think, as the Secretary General very clearly pointed out in the rather lengthy letter that he sent yesterday.
But did you get any assurances by the Israelis in that regard?
I would not say that we've gotten any assurances. Benny.
As someone who was born in the year of the snake, follow up on that. What I don't understand from all the statements the Secretary General and other made about UNRWA is the UN, as far as I understand it, is one of those bodies that prize diplomacy and negotiations. Instead of wagging the fingers and threatening, has the Secretary General and the heads of UNRWA tried to negotiate with Israel since that legislation passed the Knesset?
We have repeatedly engaged with Israeli authorities, whether it's Kogat, whether it's the Foreign Ministry and others, to get clarity on how the law is going to be implemented. And I cannot tell you that we have gotten any very clear answers. Mr. Fletcher, our our head of humanitarian affairs, will be going to the region. He will also have discussions on the broader humanitarian situation with Israeli authorities. And as the Secretary General said in the letter, that, you know, we are open to having negotiations, but those have just not happened. But it's not as if contacts have not been had. It's not as if we haven't efforted to get answers that are clear to us, but we haven't gotten those.
My question is, negotiations usually entail give and take. The question is, has the UN, UNRWA, offered any give in the sense of maybe we'll investigate much more of the allegations that Israel has made and so forth? Has that happened, or is it just you are violating international law and therefore?
I think the first, what would be the best is to get clarity. First of all, we're obviously open to discussions, and the Secretary General laid it out in the letter that he sent on the allegations. Any time that there've been allegations have been sent directly to UNRWA or to the Secretary General, they have been investigated, and as you know, OIOS has been involved in it, and so we take all of these things very seriously, but there needs to be also an input of information.
I just don't understand this whole idea of clarity. I mean, there's a law that was passed by the Knesset. The law is very specific, so I don't understand what kind of clarity you're looking for.
In terms of definition of exactly how the law is going to be implemented, we've had, to be honest with you, a challenging time in getting information that is the same from the different parties that we speak to in Israel. Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. Just a quick follow-up first to Benno's question. Can we expect, I guess, tomorrow at the UNRWA premises in East Jerusalem, will there be any UN staff or security there? Are we going to see any kind of standoff?
Let's see what happens when the sun rises over Jerusalem tomorrow.
Okay. And then the United States issued a waiver last night for life-saving medicine to their aid pause. Has that clarified things at all from the UN?
We very much welcome the decision taken by the Secretary of State. Different parts of the UN are continuing to kind of map out the impact of the pause, as it was announced a few days ago, and also the waivers that were issued. And I think each agency is dealing, kind of trying to figure things out and to get a bit more clarity on the impact.
And what is the UN hearing from humanitarian partners? We're hearing that a lot of them actually received
we're obviously
stop work orders. Did the UN receive any specific stop
work?
As
I wish I could provide you information from this podium, but that is a level of granularity that you have to hit the agencies with. Georgia.
Thank you, Stéphane. Yesterday, the Greek Foreign Minister and the Secretary General had a phone call. Could you share any details of their discussion?
Sure. So go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
And the second question, there are also reports in Cyprus that the Turkish Cypriot leader Ersin Tatar announced yesterday that the U.S. Undersecretary General Di Carlo will visit Cyprus on 10th of February. Could you confirm the visit and the date?
Sure. On the second part, as you well know, announcements of travel of UN officials become official when they're made from an official podium, like this one from ours. So we will announce an eventual visit in due course. We hope to do that soon. The Secretary General did speak to the foreign ministers. It will not surprise you that they discussed developments in the region.
That's
yes.
it. Okay.
Nothing more to share with you. Gabriel.
Thank you, Steph. Is the Secretary General's guidance and expectations that employees of UNRWA at the office in East Jerusalem report to work tomorrow?
Sorry, say again?
does the Secretary General expect that employees of UNRWA that work at the East Jerusalem office are expected to go into work tomorrow?
I think the UNRWA will continue to deliver on its mandate for as long as it can.
One on Syria. The UN is doing a lot in Syria, obviously. You spent a lot of time talking about all the engagements that are happening in Syria. Mr. Pedersen met with the foreign minister, as you mentioned. My question is, the Secretary General did not meet with the foreign minister in Davos, and he has not spoken on the phone with Mr. al-Shara. Why?
Right now, the contacts are being had on the political end at the level of Mr. Pedersen, representing the Secretary General, other senior UN officials, whether it's Mr. Fletcher, I think the High Commissioner for Human Rights, High Commissioner for Refugees, Amy Pope, the head of IOM, and others have gone to Damascus, as has Mr. Lacroix. When the time and the moment is right, the Secretary General will engage directly.
Could that be after sanctions are perhaps
I
lifted?
think when the moment is ripe, it will happen. Evelyn.
Thank you, Stéphane. Just on UNRWA, since nobody's perfect, who does the investigation of any complaints? Is that in the GA or
It's in terms of allegations against UNRWA, it was done by OIOS. Sinan, then we'll go to the screen, and then we'll do a round two.
Thank you, Steph. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So you said, you mentioned that Mr. Gay Pedersen has been meeting different public societies, different experts in Syria. So I wonder, can we include Syrian Democratic Forces as well?
I don't have all the specifics of all of his meetings. I can try to get some more, but I can tell you that he's following the situation in the Northeast very closely, and he hopes that all concerned parties will be given the time and support needed to reach compromise and chart a constructive way forward in a peaceful manner.
I mean, the reason I'm asking that, he has been meeting with the transitional government in Syria, right? And they are still in a terrorist list. But the Syrian Democratic Forces are not in a terrorist list. And why it's so difficult for him to meet them publicly? Yeah. Can we expect any meeting?
As I said, as soon as I have a bit more granularity on his activities, I will let you know.
And one more question.
Of course.
We know there's the escalation still going on in Syria between Turkish armed groups and Turkey and the Syrian Democratic Forces. So in this new chapter, how do you think this new escalation, actually it's not new, but this escalations is affecting the new peace process in Syria?
Well, I mean, obviously, the continuing violence in any part of Syria is making the situation more challenging. First of all, for the people and the civilians who suffer under the exchange of fire, but it makes it more difficult to launch a political process, and that's why our call has been for an end to all the different clashes that we've seen.
Probably this is the last one. We know there's a new constitution. I mean, they're working on a new constitution, and the transitional government said that they need a couple of years for this new constitution. Is there any update about that? Did they start it, or what?
I don't have an update here for you on that. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a couple of questions also. I start with that language the Secretary used in his statement on Congo, when he said any attack on UN personnel constitute a war crime, and you repeated that the same. Did he ever use the same language on attacking UN staff and personnel in Gaza?
I think the language that I used was attack on UN peacekeepers. That's the language we've always used, and we've always been always been very clear in condemning all attacks on UN personnel, for which there will need to be accountability wherever they occur. What is your other question?
Okay, the Israeli authorities allowed settlers now to buy Palestinian land, which is like the 60%, which is called Area C. Any comment on that? Are you aware of this?
Our position on settlements, their illegality under international law, and the settlements being an obstacle to a two-state solution remains unchanged.
My last question, 500,000 Palestinians went back to the north and especially to Gaza City. And one of them was talking on Al Jazeera, and he said, we only received 1,200 tents, and that is hundreds of thousands of tents are needed now. Can you update us on how the UN humanitarian machinery is working to give the people uprooted from their homes more tents?
With all due respect, Abdelhamid, I think I read a 4-page update which included tents and health at the start of the briefing. So that's my
any number on tents?
that's my update. We'll see if we can get any more granularity. Ibtisam.
Thank you. Just to follow up on your answer to Abdelhamid, because I'm not sure that I really understood what you meant by that. Regarding the first answer, when it comes to attacks on peacekeepers and UN premises in general, are you making differentiation? I mean, the question was regarding whether attacks on UN premises is a war crime or not.
What I said and what we've always said is that attacks on peacekeepers may constitute a war crime. And that is language that we have used over and over again on any attacks on UN peacekeepers wherever they occur, whether they occurred in Mali, in the Congo, in Lebanon, in the Central African Republic, in the many, many places where peacekeepers have unfortunately paid the highest price.
But does that
We're
mean...
not saying that attacks on anyone else may not constitute a crime, but this language is specific to peacekeeping missions.
Then the question is, why aren't you using a similar language when it comes to attacks on UN premises or UN personnel that are not peacekeeping missions?
We are not.
Isn't it also isn't also a war crime?
We are not. First of all, the language they say may constitute a war crime, right? And I think every killing of a civilian in conflict needs to be, or a UN person will need to be examined and to see what kind of crime it constitutes. But it will remain a crime. Benny.
This is on a different topic. Part of the deal, the ceasefire deal in Gaza tomorrow, there are 3 Israelis to be released, but also 8 actually Thais from Thailand.
Thailand, yeah.
And while everybody knows pretty much how, or at least know the outlines of what kind of deal Israel and Hamas have achieved under what premises, the Thais, which by the way, 8 of them, 3 are dead, the Thais, it's unclear who negotiated that deal, and my question is, has the UN been involved at all in negotiating that deal?
Not to my knowledge. Edie, and then we'll go to our guest.
Thank you, Steph. Just ahead of Gar Peterson's closed briefing to the Council, is there any way that we can get him for some open comments?
I will do my best to advocate on your behalf because I'm always happier when they answer questions as opposed to me. With that, I'd like to go to our guest. Luke, if we could put Luke on the screen.